Benjamin Morse Archer was a 32-year-old from Delaware City, Delaware. He was very artistic and had survived a serious car wreck. At approximately 6 a.m. on March 2nd, 2016, Ben walked away from his mother's home. He was found a few hours later in a local park, barefoot and shivering. When his family returned later, Ben wasn't there. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Denzel, and this is Unfound. Admit it. How many of you, when you saw the title to this episode, thought of that movie from the 1980s with Matthew Modine? Or is it Modine? Being 50 now, I was the perfect age when it came out in 1985. It tells the story of a high school senior, Loudon Swain, who observes that he really hasn't done anything noteworthy with his life yet. So he sets out to lose 22 pounds so he can wrestle the toughest guy in the state. Everybody thinks Loudon is crazy, but he has a plan. And no, I won't give away the ending. But that film still has a great effect on me all these years later. Why? Because I think the point that Loudon makes about himself is a question we should always ask ourselves no matter what our age is. Have we done anything big? Have we challenged ourselves? And what sacrifices are we willing to endure to make sure we don't waste the abilities we have? Maybe more to the point, are we willing to fail spectacularly in trying to do something good? Will our egos be able to handle the criticism? Or will our actions be controlled by the mob? A group of people who probably don't have the courage to do anything great themselves. Well, in the disappearance of Ben Archer, a guy who never marched to the beat of any drummer but his own, after he went missing, a friend contacted his mother and offered up an opinion on what happened to him. And we're left to examine, could this friend be correct? Could Ben now be on a vision quest? And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Good's website, charleyproject.org. Ben Archer would never have fallen into any stereotype. He worked for himself, but he also worked for his father. Ben was living with his mother at the time of his disappearance, yet he also spent years traveling in the western United States, sometimes not talking to his family for months. Ben was engaged to be married at one time, but then broke that off to be single again. And due to a car wreck in late 2015, Ben went from being an Ayn Rand atheist to delving deep into spirituality, having long talks with his mother and others about it. Like I said, Ben was never a stereotype. However, in the weeks before his disappearance, Ben started to display signs of paranoia. He canceled all his internet accounts and spoke of something bad happening, although Ben never did say what that meant. So, around 6 a.m. on March 2nd, 2016, Ben left his mother's house for a walk. However, despite the cold weather, he left without a jacket and did not wear any shoes or socks. Later that morning, Ben's brother and stepfather found him in the nearby Fort DuPont State Park. He was shivering but wouldn't leave. Ben said he needed to bless the park. Ben's mother, over the phone, tried her best to convince him to come home, but Ben wouldn't listen to her reasoning. The stepfather and brother left, leaving Ben to his praying. Not long after, Ben's mother returned to the park by herself, bringing clothes and boots for Ben. but he wasn't there. Still, she left the items, hoping Ben would get them. Before sunset, Ben's family returned to the park to find the clothes there, but the boots were missing. Ben was never seen again. This is Unfound's first trip to the state of Delaware, but this is not the first time we've covered a case in which a missing person displayed a distinct change in demeanor before disappearing. What is unique in Ben's is that nobody would be surprised that he took off once again, like he had earlier in his life to find himself. Yet, that possibility must stand the scrutiny of the answers to these questions. Number 1. Is it possible that Ben had more than just a spiritual revelation after his car wreck? Are we sure he didn't suffer some type of brain injury? Number 2. Why did seemingly only one other person besides Ben's family see him in the park despite it having groundskeepers and employees on the premises? And number 3, what are we to make of a phone call Ben's ex-fiancée got on the very same day Ben went missing? Ben's family is open to all possibilities, but they pin their hopes on believing that Ben is out there alive somewhere. The guest for this episode is Ben's mother, Tiz O'Toole. Unfound News. I hope you caught my interview with Dr. Grace Telesco this past Monday on the Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice YouTube channel. We discussed the disappearance of Chelsea Cobo, a case that certainly stands as unique in Unfound's catalog. I believe Grace and I will be getting together again next month for another show. And while you're at it, please subscribe to her YouTube channel. Next, I managed to make a couple more map analyses videos this past week for Unfound's YouTube channel. The first one was for the disappearance of J.R. Mullihan. The second was for Renee Lamanna. If you haven't, please check out all the content we provide on YouTube. Between the maps, the live shows, the interviews with Dr. Telesco, etc., Unfound's YouTube channel has to be the most comprehensive true crime outlet on that social media site. Finally, there may be a collaboration coming up between myself and the host of another true crime program to cover a disappearance together. Maybe. Possibly. Pretty sure? Somewhat sure? It's probably a long way off because we haven't even decided on a topic yet. But I think it's going to happen. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound supports accounts on Podomatic, iTunes, Stitcher, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, Deezer, Facebook, and YouTube. Speaking of YouTube, on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, please join us on our podcast channel for the Unfound Live Show. All of you can talk with me, and I can answer your questions. Contribute to Unfound at patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. You can also contribute at PayPal, paypal.me/Unfound Podcast. And do not forget the website, theunfoundpodcast.com. A note before the interview starts. I need to give a shout out to a fellow disc golfer and tournament director who suggested to Tiz that she should contact me regarding the disappearance of her son. Mark, thank you. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the mother of Benjamin Archer, Tiz O'Toole. Tiz, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you, Ed.
You're very welcome. Let's start here as we usually do. I like to make sure the listeners have a good idea about the family of the missing person, so let's start there. Tiz, tell the audience about your family. How many children do you have? Where does Ben fall in your line of children? We'll just start there.
I had 6 children. I lost one. Ben was the second oldest, the oldest son.
Wow. 6.
6 children. Wow. How many boys, how many girls?
3 girls and 3 boys.
You split them up just like the Brady Bunch.
Yeah, not on purpose.
Not on purpose. Okay, that wasn't the plan. Okay. All right, kids. 6 boys, 6 girls. Ben's the oldest boy. And I would never ask you